360, President Trump says the United States will take over Gaza and says, quote, everybody I've spoken to loves the idea. Nearly 2 million people who live there might beg to differ. Also tonight, the FBI purge continues, and now DOJ officials are eyeing firing perhaps thousands more, now being investigated for simply doing their jobs. Also, CNN's John King all over the map in Nebraska, where the immigrant workforce is living in fear, and their employers are worried about filling jobs most Americans will not take. Good evening, John Berman here in for Anderson, and even in a flood of news, our top story is almost biblical in proportion. Tonight, at a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, the President of the United States declared the U.S. will take over Gaza. Own it, he said, and he would not rule out U.S. troops to do it. As for the men, women, and children displaced by the fighting in Gaza, he said they need to leave. 1.9 million people, that's according to the UN, 1.8 million people according to the president. In his view, the war which Hamas launched with their unprovoked October 7th attack should end with all those people living elsewhere and the United States in control of a large, almost beach resort.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different.
Again, he did not rule out American troops on the ground. He said he envisions this country, the U.S., taking a, quote, long-term ownership position in Gaza. Needless to say, this is no offhanded statement. It is also not normal, and it is also counter to what U.S. presidents have been saying for generations.
My vision is two states, living side by side, in peace and security.
Two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, as part of a comprehensive peace between Israel and all of its neighbors.
Two states for two peoples, both of whom have deep and ancient roots in this land, living side by side in peace and security.
More now on all of this from CNN's Caitlin Collins in Washington, who was at the press conference. Caitlin, you questioned the president. Was the White House, were officials aware that he was going to make this sweeping announcement tonight? And where does he say he has the authority?
Well, John, he had been seeming to build to it really all day. We heard from him on Gaza and talking about moving Palestinians out of Gaza while it was being rebuilt before the Prime Minister of Israel even arrived here at the White House this afternoon. And then again, President Trump repeated that sentiment when he was sitting next to him in the Oval Office, talking about this idea that it is going to take 10 to 15 years to rebuild Gaza. And he was framing it through a humanitarian perspective initially, saying that essentially it's not livable in Gaza because of all of the Israeli strikes and how destroyed the area has been, which we already know, given how displaced the millions of people who do live there already have been over the last 16 months as this war has been going on since Hamas attacked on October 7th. But the question is what that looks like. And people were also raising the question of what an explosive sentiment this would be, certainly in the Middle East, to one, say that people should move out of their homeland, which Gaza is for the Palestinians, but two, also this suggestion that neighboring countries should take them. That is already something that Egypt and Jordan have outright rejected, this idea that they would be housing Palestinians inside their countries. We've seen some Israeli officials suggesting that previously, and they have said absolutely not, that is not happening. The president, though, does not seem to think that is off the table, and my key question to him tonight was where the Palestinians will go. This is what he said. To follow up on what you were saying about the Gazans leaving Gaza and going to other countries, one, where exactly are you suggesting that they should go? And two, are you saying they should return after it's rebuilt? And if not, who do you envision living there?
I envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. But They've tried the other, and they've tried it for decades and decades and decades. It's not going to work. It didn't work. It will never work. And you have to learn from history. History is, just can't let it keep repeating itself. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell. And those people will now be able to live in peace. We'll make sure that it's done world class. It'll be wonderful for the people. Palestinians mostly we're talking about. And I have a feeling that despite them saying no, I have a feeling that the king in Jordan and that the general president, but that the general in Egypt will open their hearts and will give us the kind of land that we need to get this done.
He said he believes that the leaders of Egypt and Jordan will open their hearts there, John. I mean, that's a real question of what this means, and if he tries to essentially force Egypt and Jordan into this deal. The king is coming here next week, so that will be certainly at the forefront of that discussion. But before you even get to what that would look like and where the Palestinians would go, the president saying that the United States should take over the Gaza Strip is one of the most remarkable statements that I have ever heard, certainly at a press conference. And where he is saying this should happen, keep in mind there is a very, very delicate ceasefire deal that's in place right now. The question going into this was whether phase 2 could even happen, because that calls for a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. It wasn't even clear that they can get to that, and Trump was saying he hopes it will hold. But remember, there are Hamas fighters living in Gaza right now. Obviously, there are Palestinian civilians living in Gaza right now, and there are Israeli hostages who are being held still by Hamas in Gaza right now. And the question of what happens to all three of that, John, is just there aren't really a lot of details in this. But certainly one thing was clear is the president was being very serious about what this would look like. He cited conversations with other leaders in the region. He did not name any of them individually, John. But I was just texting with one Israeli official this evening that I know from being on the ground in Israel, and was saying this idea of having the U.S. be in control of the Gaza Strip would be, to say the least, incredibly hard to implement.
A long-term ownership position. All right, Caitlin Collins at the White House. Thank you so much. We'll see you at 9 for The Source. With us now, CNN's John King, CNN national security analyst Beth Sanders, CNN senior political commentator David Axelrod, and Republican strategist Aaron Perini. David Axelrod, when you hear the President of the United States say that he wants a long-term ownership position for the U.S. in Gaza, what do you hear, and what do you think the world hears?
I mean, it's really hard to know where to start with that. The idea that you're saying we are going to expel 1.8 million people from their homeland. We are going to compel the Egyptians and the Jordanians to take them. Both countries have strongly rejected that. It's kind of an existential position for certainly for Jordan, and probably the Egyptians feel the same way. They don't want Palestinians living in their countries. They think that destabilizes their countries. The idea that the U.S. would just seize the land and redevelop it as a real estate project with the help of the U.S. military, I mean, all of it is kind of mind-boggling. But John, I think there's a bigger thing. Given everything that's going on in Washington in these first 2 weeks, I've said for 8 years, the thing that concerns me is beyond policy. Donald Trump doesn't believe in rules and laws and norms or institutions. He doesn't believe them domestically. He doesn't believe in them internationally. And he has defied them to get to this point and back to the presidency. And I think he feels indomitable. And his attitude is, we'll take what we want to take. We'll take Gaza. We'll take Greenland. We'll make Canada a state. We'll take the Panama Canal. This is really a dangerous attitude, just as it's dangerous to say we're going to walk in and take over agencies and dissolve agencies and decide how money's going to be spent regardless of what the Constitution says. There are implications to all of this that are very, very large for peace in the world, and large for a functioning democracy here at home.
Beth, is there any actual mechanism for the United States to do this? And how would this region look upon basically a U.S. American island on this territory, which is some of the most contentious on earth?
You know, I always, when people ask me what it was like to brief President Trump, one of the things I always say is that, you know, well, you have to adjust because he doesn't think like a typical foreign policy establishment person. And I think we just witnessed just a stunningly understatement to say outside the box thinking. So nobody, this isn't on anybody's bingo card. I think that region is probably, if they haven't heard it before from Trump, is like literally their jaws on the ground. There is no mechanism for this. There is no precedent for this. But you know, as David was just saying, it runs counter to the Muslim street in the region. That's sometimes different than what leaders think. But the leaders in the region are afraid of the Muslim street. And they're afraid that if they somehow support any of this, even Saudi Arabia, that's an autocracy, it could be a problem for them at home. They worry about assassination. They worry about protests. So Jordan, Egypt, and even Saudi Arabia, these kinds of places. And then on the flip side, even the settlers probably aren't excited about this in Israel because that's their land, not America's. So I think that this will not actually materialize as presented today somehow.
John King, what about the Dearborn Street? I mean, where do you see U.S. domestic politics at play here?
Well, there are a lot of Democrats saying "I told you so" to their Muslim friends in Dearborn and in Hamtramck, who couldn't vote for President Biden, and many of them, some of them voted for President Trump, some of them stayed home. So there will be a domestic political fallout here. But John, I think this is just much bigger than that. You have a president of the United States saying he will forcibly resettle people who live on land the international community says is theirs. It's a violation of international law. It's a favor to his friend Benjamin Netanyahu, but it runs counter to American policy. You showed George W. Bush and Joe Biden and Barack Obama. It goes back before that as well. For an American president who's supposed to be the beacon of democracy to the world, saying, look, it hasn't worked, so I don't think it's your land anymore. Sorry, you got to go, and I'm going to take it over. I have a few already from some European ambassadors saying, what? They don't think this is going to happen. They're trying to figure out what the end game is. Trump often throws up these incredibly big blustery things because he has a goal somewhere down here beneath them, and they're trying to sort that out. But if you put it in the context of what you were talking about at the start of the program, we are 2 weeks and 1 day in, and they're dismantling federal agencies. They're firing federal employees. They're trying to do away with things that if the Congress would stand up to him and say, sir, we could talk about this, but actually the Constitution says that's our job. This is a presidential power grab and a view of presidential power, and now a view of American power. To David's point about Greenland, the Panama Canal, what's next? What's next? If he doesn't like the management of some country in Africa, if a red state doesn't like the blue state next door, there are rules and norms and laws for a reason. You can challenge them, but for a president of the United States to unilaterally say we can take land that belongs to somebody else is beyond astounding.
The issues at play are so big here. I realize it feels like we're moving quickly, but there's just so many different aspects of this going on. Aaron, I want to play something else from this news conference. Listen to this.
Given what you've said about Gaza, did the U.S. send troops to help secure the security evacuation?
As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that.
So that's not ruling out, Aaron, using U.S. troops in Gaza. This is a president who, for many years, opposed U.S. intervention in Iraq and wanted to pull troops out of Afghanistan. Now he wants to deploy potentially to Gaza?
I wouldn't necessarily say that he wants to deploy, but this is a very typical tactic of President Trump, which is to say, I'm not taking anything off the table with whatever the topic is, and certainly when it comes to geopolitics. Yes, it's very clear that Hamas is running Gaza as of this point, and that remains a threat to the sovereignty of Israel. And with Bibi Netanyahu standing there, Donald Trump was doing everything to show our greatest ally in the Middle East, that he wants to have their back and provide security. This is something I hadn't heard of before, the idea of the United States unilaterally taking over Gaza. I think we are very far from any actual movement on any of this, but the main part of this being Israeli sovereignty, I think, is one of the biggest keys here for Donald Trump. And with Hamas in Gaza, that is a very close terrorist organization that can launch attacks into Israel at any moment, and we have seen how deadly Hamas can be to the Israeli population.
All right, stick around, everyone. A lot more to discuss on this. We have a live report from Israel as the country and the region react to tonight's sweeping announcement from the President of the United States, who again says he wants the United States to take a long-term ownership position in Gaza, and later what a top Democratic senator makes of all of this.